The first book of Samuel tends to begin slow, and then it moves actually fairly quickly after that. And so we're dealing with several passages having to do with the pregnancy of Hannah, the pre-pregnancy when she had no children and was being picked on by Peninnah. And then, of course, she's praying that she has a child. And yesterday we saw that Hannah gives birth to a child. Now, today, we're going to look at the calling of the child. She dedicated her child to the Lord. And now this child is living with Eli, and we're going to talk tomorrow about his evil sons with Eli, who, again, was a good man. And this is where the call of Eli, the call of Samuel happens. Samuel is sleeping, and he hears the Lord call him. But he thinks, obviously, it's Eli. Who's calling me? Hey, who's saying that? So he goes to Eli, and Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. So he goes back to sleep. He hears it again, and he goes to see Eli. You just called me again. I never called you. Just go back to sleep. And it happens again. And finally, Eli realizes what's going on. He says, go back to sleep. He says, if it happens again, then right away say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. There was a book of biblical meditation. You probably still can find it. That was the title of the book, Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So this is Samuel's response to the Lord. If you notice, it's not that much of a different response. It is different, but not that much of a different response from Mary. Mary saying, be it done unto me according to your word. Samuel is saying, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And so begins the role of Samuel. And Samuel plays a very powerful role with the leadership of Israel. And remember, we're still talking Israel. Judah does not exist at this point. It's not going to exist until after the reign of Solomon, so where are we now? We are with Eli, who is the high priest. There is no king of Israel. We are soon going to find our first king of Israel, who will be Saul, and then we'll see David become the second king of Israel. A third is Solomon. So we are several administrations away from the formation of Judah. So we're only dealing with one country now, and that is the nation of Israel. And so there you see this powerful time. And again, as I said, the beginning of this book tends to be a little slow. So there you see it, where you've got this reality of Eli is being called and he responds. And it's a reminder that that's the way we can respond to the Lord. So there it is in verse 10 of chapter 3 of 1 Samuel. And there it is right there. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. I'm going to take a look, see what it says in the Douay-Rheims version. It's probably something very similar, but let's see what's said here. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. This is the Old English. And when I read from the Douay-Rheims, I actually update the English. So essentially, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. And so we look at that. This is now he realizes that it's the Lord who's been calling him, and he's now listening. And that's something that we can do when we want to respond to the Lord. Now, that is what is known as a mystical experience. The other day, someone was questioning what mysticism is. There's an old joke that mysticism is something that begins in mist and ends in schism. But in fact, we are all called to be mystics. Now, his understanding, if we're called to be mystics, that means we're called to be these deep prayers and prayers and spend our time like in a monastery seeking God. No, that's not what a mystic is. A mystic is someone who is usually prayerful of some form and has you could say supernatural experiences of their relationship with God. Now, here's a good question. What's the difference between a mystic and a psychic? Huge difference. A mystic is discerning and listens only to the word of God as best he or she can discern it. A psychic is listening for or whatever powers may give them information. And people will tell me all the time, well, I went to a psychic, which you should never do. But I went to a psychic and all the information they gave me was accurate. And my response is always, the question is not whether or not the information is accurate. The question is, from whom did she receive or he receive the information? Whereas in a mystic is someone who is receiving that information from God. And there are priests who are mystics, and they will have experiences, maybe partially during their priesthood, some of them totally during their priesthood. They will have experiences when they're celebrating Mass that they will have a deeper understanding of some of the realities they're dealing with. That's a mystical experience. So this is what Samuel is going through. He's going through a mystical experience, and this is the beginning of an understanding that he will be a prophet for the Lord. And we see that he is a strong prophet for the Lord. What do the prophets do? We can take a couple examples. We can take Samuel and we can take Nathan. Nathan becomes the prophet of David. Samuel is the prophet of Saul. They hear the word of the Lord speaking to them, and then they go bring that word to the king. That's what they do. So here, Samuel is hearing the word of the Lord speaking to him in the call, and he will eventually see how he uses that word. And when he does that, he will hear that the Lord is calling him to speak to Samuel or to do things, or speak to Saul or to do things. So one of the things that the Lord says to Samuel, this is after the reading we have today, and this is from the Douay-Rheims. Behold, I do a thing in Israel, and whosoever shall hear it, both his ears shall tingle. In that day I will raise up against Heli all things I have spoken concerning his house. I will begin, and I will make an end. For I foretold unto him that I will judge his house forever for iniquity, because he knew that his sons did wickedly and did not chastise them. Heli in Douay-Rheims is Eli in the other books. So therefore, Samuel is learning from the Lord that he is going to deal with Eli, even though Eli, again, is a good person, but his sons are, as it says right here in the Douay-Rheims, wicked. And he did not chastise them. And there are those parents who don't chastise their children because they care about them so much, but they don't understand their form of caring does not work because they don't discipline the child so that the child will understand what is good and what is bad. So they don't discipline the child. And that is a disaster. The way it continues, by the way, and Samuel slept till morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel feared to tell the vision to Heli. Then Heli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son, and he answered, Here I am. And he asked him, What is the word that the Lord has spoken to thee? Well, it's funny you ask. I beseech thee, hide it not from me. May God do so and so to thee, and add so and so, if thou hide from me one word of all that you were to say to me. So Samuel had to tell him the truth. And then all of a sudden we understand that Eli learns the truth of what Samuel had to tell him. These are some pretty powerful words, and we're going to see. And remember, he doesn't say, you may be punished if you don't start smarten up your kids. No, you will have to suffer because you didn't discipline your kids. You didn't teach your kids a holy way. You are a holy person, but you didn't teach your kids, your sons, a holy way. And this is something that's important. God is holding Eli responsible for not properly teaching his sons. Now, if he properly taught his sons and his sons acted the same way, that would be something completely different. And that happens. Where, one of the things we can look at in the Rob Reiner case, and we don't know all the background behind it, the death of Rob and his wife, but we know that his son, what's his name? His son, let me look that up. His son, Nick, we know all that about his son, Nick, that allegedly he committed the murders. But we also know that there was a lot of trouble there. And one of the things that's come out is, some people have asked the question whether or not Nick allegedly had a psychotic break. That may be something different than what we see with Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli. Because it's one thing to have a mental illness and have a psychotic break, and to be something that the parents can't understand or control. It's another thing that you have sons that are just plain devious and evil, and you don't correct them. And that's what Eli is being held responsible for. He did not correct them, and he knows that they are engaged. And what are they doing? They're basically extorting people. You know what you're going to do for me? Here's what you're going to do for me. You see all that meat that you're going to sacrifice to the Lord? Well, you're going to give me the best of it, which, by the way, is forbidden in the Bible. You give the Lord the best. Yep, best of it comes to me, and you're going to help me, and you're going to pay me. That's what you're going to do. You're going to pay me. That kind of stuff. They were just absolute criminals. And Eli knew. And he may have come to a point where he said, there's nothing I can do about that. So Samuel communicates to Eli, this is coming. And it's the first lesson he learns in being a prophet is not an easy thing. And he's going to actually have to do the same thing. So does Nathan, by the way, who becomes David's prophet. Do the same thing. Communicate to the king what the Lord wants them to say to the king and what they don't want to say to the king. There's a fascinating scene from Jeremiah. Now, you know that I've spoken to you before. I have Tourette syndrome. It's been in dormancy since I was in my 40s. Actually, I've been in dormancy, since I was in my 40s. So, but one of the things of Tourette syndrome is you say things you don't want to say. And there's an aspect of Tourette syndrome where actually the best example of Tourette syndrome, the best portrayal of Tourette syndrome that I can think of that's done well, even though not fully accurate, but it really does let people know what it's like to live as someone with Tourette syndrome. The form where you say things you don't want to say is Jim Carrey's movie Liar, Liar. Liar, Liar is excellent because remember, he can't tell a lie. And that's not the issue with Tourette syndrome. It's that he's impelled. He has to say these words, whether he likes it or not. Remember, I had a barking form, but other people have the words form. Well, in Jeremiah, which I also call the scene of Tourette syndrome, where Jeremiah does not want to say these words that the Lord is telling him to say, and he even holds them. He prevents himself from saying them, which people with Tourette's will also do. And then all of a sudden he can't hold them anymore, and the words come out, and out they come, and he tries, and he can't do anything. That's what Tourette syndrome is actually like, especially those who have the struggle with words. But what you're seeing there is Samuel, at a very young age, is learning this will be his role, to speak what the Lord wants him to speak, whether or not he wants to say those words. And the first thing that happens is he's got to speak to Eli. This is literally, if you look at the story, the Lord speaks to him and says, speak, and Eli tells him, to say the Lord, speak, Lord, your servant is listening, or your servant hears. And then the Lord gives him these very hard words to tell Eli. So day one on his new job, this is what he's told to do. He's got to speak to Eli and tell him words he does not want to say. But that is the role of the prophet. Some pretty interesting words there. And he's got to realize that, not that if he doesn't change, this is what will happen. It's that, no, this is what's going to happen. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Tomorrow is where the big story, we learn about Hophni and Phinehas and that whole story. We're going to be back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Snakes, zombies, sharks, heights, speaking in public. The list of fears is endless. But while you're clutching your blanket in the dark, wondering if the sound in the hall was actually a footstep, the real danger is in your hand when you're behind the wheel. And while you might think a great white shark is scary, what's really terrifying and even deadly is distracted driving. Eyes forward. Don't drive distracted. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. And remember, this is a show where we talk about the first reading, but then we also talk about some other issues, often within the context of how we respond as Catholics. And there's more information coming out about a whole incident involving the shooting of Renee Good, who was the woman who was driving the SUV that driving the SUV that the ICE officer believed was aimed at him. And actually, there's some video that she may have allegedly hit him. And of course, he fired, shot, and killed her. And there's all kinds of protests and anger and everything coming out of that. Well, remember, I said to you yesterday, people aren't getting this because the issue is that ICE is just doing their job. And their job is to do what the law says. So your real issue, if you're going to bring a protest, should be to your local representative in Congress and to your state or Commonwealth group who are in Congress, including the senators and the representatives, because they're the ones that authorized what happens with ICE to happen in this country. So they're the ones. And if you remember, there's some people talking about defunding ICE. Well, if you remember when there was the shutdown about a month ago, I said if the people who are holding up the approval of the budget, or what is it, the budget, whatever it is, the people who are holding that up, who are complaining about ICE and immigration and everything else, if they were really serious, they would call for defunding ICE, and that never happened. Now, some are, but I'm sorry, that's the horses. That's closing the barn doors after the horses leave. The reality is, everything is in the hands of Congress. Now, one of the things that's happened is, I guess, Tom Homan, because this is one of his guys. I mean, he is the superior, and this is one of his guys who now, he said he's very distraught, he's very upset, and now he's being doxxed and everything else. And he's trying to tamp down the temperature. Okay, fine. But we also have to realize that he helped raise the temperature. You remember he said that he was coming to Massachusetts and he was going to I may have the words wrong, bring hell upon Massachusetts. Well, that raised the temperature. I am a veteran. I was livid when I heard that. I was absolutely livid when I heard that because I'm a veteran. And he is a government employee. A government employee has no right to threaten people like that. And that's the way I looked at it. So you're right. The temperature is being raised on both sides, and that doesn't solve any issues at all. You really want to come to see a solution. Now, the solution was requested back in the first Trump administration when he said he wanted to see updated immigration laws that were going to allow people to stay. Now, since then, you had the craziness that happened during the Biden administration where anyone could just cross the border. And I'm going to tell you something that happened that I strongly disagreed with. Now, there are people who have come across the border. They've been here. They've been working here for years and not necessarily under the table. Never work under the table. If you're working under the table, the only thing you're doing is benefiting your employer. You're not benefiting yourself. If you're a citizen or not, doesn't make any difference. Never work under the table. They have not necessarily been working under the table, but what they were doing is working and paying taxes. The IRS has a system that allows them to pay taxes even without a Social Security number, in case you didn't know that. It's called a tax ID number. And they can pay taxes, but they can't benefit from their taxes. So they can pay taxes, they can pay FICA, they can pay the whole thing, but they're not allowed to benefit by the law. Now, the law may have changed since I first understood this. But what was happening is you may have people here for 30 years working not under the table. They were working, they weren't authorized to work, but they were working. And they weren't necessarily paid less than everyone else, but they were working. Okay. And they were paying taxes. Taxes were being taken out. They didn't have any benefit over it. And what was happening is during the Biden administration, people were crossing the border and being handed working papers right away. Well, that wasn't fair to anybody. And you can say, well, those people weren't fair, but you're fine. You can say all those things. That's fine. I can understand that, and I hear that. But what I'm saying is the Biden administration was being extremely unfair to everybody right across the board. I'm not getting into the politics because you're not going to vote for Joe Biden again, but you can see what happened. Now, one of the things you have to understand, so that was raising the temperature, and then Tom Homan, whose job is to undo all of that came in the Biden administration, he comes out with those words for Massachusetts. I'm going to bring hell on Massachusetts. And he's very angry that Boston police did not work with ICE. Well, come to find out, I just heard it on Katz and Crosby where the guest was Alan Dershowitz. The states do not have to cooperate with the feds. Bottom line, they're not allowed to impede the feds, but they don't have to cooperate with the feds. So in Massachusetts, if they weren't cooperating with the feds, they had that right to do that because that's part of states' rights. Now, we all know that these people who are serious criminals, no one wants them here. No one. So the whole idea that someone could come here illegally, do some really illegal things, some horrendous things, and then be thrown back on the street, nobody cares. Well, that's wrong. That's completely wrong, the whole bit. And what's happening is supposedly these were the people that they're going after. But remember what was said when before the election, is J.D. Vance said that, our vice president. He said, and we were going to begin the largest deportation process, I forget the exact words he used, ever in this country. So they were planning to deport people who other people knew were here, but they weren't. Some of them were working legitimately. In other words, they may not have had working papers, but they were paying taxes and everything else. You know, John McCain used to say that. And then others were maybe not working. Maybe they were working under the table, and we know all that story. Which, by the way, again, don't ever work under the table. I don't care who you are. And we know that whole story. We know all of that stuff going on. But they weren't robbing people. They weren't stealing. They weren't doing anything wrong. And you know the thing that I say all the time, I use the term undocumented. Why? Because Charles Manson was documented. Charles Manson had documents. That's why he did that. So you had these people, and everyone says, well, we don't want gang members, and we don't want rapists and pedophiles and all this here. If they don't belong here, then send them home. But that's not how they started. They said, we're sending everyone home. And then Tom Homan said, we're going to bring hell on Boston. And he chastised the Boston police chief. Well, that raised the temperature too. So I'm not agreeing with what's being said in Minnesota, but I'm not agreeing with what was said by Tom Homan. So that raised the temperature too. And we as Catholics have a role not to raise the temperature. We really do. So how do we respond? Well, again, first understand, you don't attack someone who's doing their job. If you want to stand, remember this, if you want to impede ICE, you have to realize that's illegal. So that means you have to offer yourself up to be arrested and go through whatever process that would require, that includes whatever prison sentence you get and everything else, because you chose to do that when you chose to impede ICE. You can't say, well, we were standing up for something else. And you know who would tell you that more than anyone else? Daniel Berrigan, who's no longer living, but Father Daniel Berrigan, who was one of the major anti-war protesters of the 60s. And he did time in prison doing exactly that. But he would never say, well, no, you got to work it. No, he would say, if you broke the law, then part of your protest is that you have to do the time. If you don't want to do the crime, don't do the time. He would clearly say that as a witness to what you stand for. And so a lot of this is going on. But yes, we all have to lower the temperature. So I'm not telling anyone at all. To get involved in breaking the law. I'm just saying, if you plan to do that, then the other part of your plan is you're going to go to court and plead guilty. If you're not doing that, then you're being a hypocrite. Sorry, that's the way it is. But what you really want to do is you want to start, we really want to do is start putting pressure on, legitimate pressure on our elected representatives and senators in Congress and say, this problem is existing because of you. You've got to fix it. And granted, some of them might say, well, I'm a freshman in Congress. I wasn't part of this. You're fine, but you can fix it now. This problem exists because of you. We need to fix our immigration laws. We need to come up with a solution, and we need to come up with this. So it's important to see, but we have to be the voice of not violence. We cannot be the voice of violence. We have to be the voice of reason. And no Catholic has any business, number one, impeding or causing violence or anything. No Catholic has any right to do that. But what can happen, and this is important, is for a Catholic to be able to speak out, and maybe, Catholic lawyers represent those who are detained, work through the system, and definitely, and maybe Catholic philanthropists contribute in immigration, or lawyers and whatever. That's what you can do, and see what can be done, and do it legitimately. But no one has the right to do. And if you do it, no one has the right to raise the temperature, to cause violence, to set up situations that may cause the death of one person or another. But if you do that and you are arrested, then you cannot plead any kind of, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was standing up for the truth, therefore you can't put me in prison. No, it's part of the deal. Go read the works of Daniel Berrigan, and he would tell you, no, that's part of the deal. And Dorothy Day would have told you the same thing. That's all part of the deal. So preferably work through the system. And really, this is where, and unfortunately, I know a lot of people hated him, and he had an interesting history, but unfortunately, one of the guys who was really great in helping people with this was Senator Ted Kennedy, who unfortunately is no longer around. We'll be back tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed Day. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.